Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The Carpathian Mountains did not meet them with the welcoming song of the wind, but with a heavy, tense silence, the kind that usually precedes a violent storm. The sky over Romania resembled an upturned cauldron, in which a thick, dark grey potion of clouds was brewing. It hung low over the jagged peaks, clinging to the tops of ancient spruce trees, and from time to time spilled an icy rain that smelled of wet pine needles and, faintly, of sulphur. Luna Lovegood stood on a small wooden platform where the portkey, an old rusted kettle that now lay lifelessly in the tall grass, had deposited them a moment ago. She slowly adjusted the strap of her expedition bag, which was embroidered with beads, and inhaled deeply. "There is much sadness here," she said softly, looking not at the majestic mountains, but somewhere into the space between the trees. "It settles on the lungs like dust in an old library." Rolf Scamander, who was currently attempting to carefully stow the portkey into a special containment unit so that Muggle tourists wouldn't accidentally find themselves transported to London, raised his head. His hair, always a little tufted and messy, was now damp from the drizzle. He looked focused and, as always, slightly enchanted by the very fact of a new mystery's existence. "This is a reserve, Luna," he replied, wiping his hands on his traveling robes made of tough dragon hide, ethically sourced, naturally, from hide the dragon had shed itself during molting. "The most dangerous creatures in Europe live here. The tension in the air is normal. The magical background radiation is so dense that Muggles probably have headaches for miles around." "No, Rolf." Luna shook her head, and her silver radish earrings, a tribute to the past she wore only on special occasions, gave a soft chime. "This is not the tension of predators. This is the silence of emptiness. Do you hear it? Not a single roar." Rolf froze. Indeed, they were standing on the territory of the world's largest dragon sanctuary, home to hundreds of gigantic lizards. Usually the air here should have been trembling with thunderous roars that would rattle window panes in the keepers' cottages. It should have smelled of scorched wood, roasted meat, and molten rock. But instead, they heard only the rustle of rain and the distant mournful cry of some bird. "You are right," Rolf said, frowning. His scientific interest instantly shifted to concern. "This is unnatural. Come on. They are likely waiting for us." They set off down a narrow, rocky path into the valley, where the stone buildings of the reserve's administrative center could be seen. These structures looked as though they had grown out of the rocks hundreds of years ago, rough, massive, covered in moss and protective runes that glowed dimly in the half-light of the day. They were met not by Charlie Weasley, as Luna had hoped. He, as it turned out, was on assignment in Norway, studying the migration of Norwegian ridgebacks, but by the current senior magizoologist of the South Sector, Marius Codrianu. He was a tall, sinewy wizard with a face etched with deep lines and eyes the color of old amber. On his cheek was an old burn scar resembling a branching lightning bolt, the professional mark of those who work with Romanian longhorns. "Mr. Scamander, Mrs. Scamander." He nodded dryly, not offering his hand. His voice was raspy, as if he had been inhaling smoke. "Thank you for arriving so quickly. I read your papers on the psychosomatics of hippogriffs. I hope your theories work with creatures that weigh 50 times as much." "We hope so too, Mr. Codrianu." Rolf replied, getting straight to the point. In your letter you wrote about a loss of fire. We assumed this was a metaphor, perhaps depression due to climate change or diet. Codreanu sighed heavily and gestured for them to follow. They passed through high oak gates bound in iron and found themselves in an inner courtyard. The atmosphere of a field hospital reigned here. Several wizards in protective dragon hide suits were running from one building to another, carrying armfuls of dried herbs and buckets of some murky liquid. If only it were a metaphor, Codreanu muttered, leading them to massive double doors that led to the quarantine zone. I will show you. Better to see once than read 100 times in a report. But I warn you, the sight is not for the faint-hearted. And, please, do not use flash photography. They are afraid of the light now. Dragons. Afraid of light. Can you believe it? Luna remained silent, but her large, pale eyes were carefully scanning the space. She noticed that even the magical torches on the walls burned dimly, and their flames were not the usual orange, but a pale, almost translucent white. They entered a vast hangar, the ceiling of which was lost in darkness. The space was divided into gigantic enclosures by magical barriers that hummed with tension. This is Argent, said Codreanu, stopping by the first enclosure. A young male Romanian longhorn. He is only 15 years old. Adolescence. He should be tearing around the mountains, fighting for territory, and burning old stumps for fun. Luna approached the barrier closely. Behind the shimmering curtain lay a creature of incredible, but now ravaged, beauty. The Romanian longhorn was famous for its dark green scales, reminiscent of emerald armor, and long golden horns. But now, Argent's scales looked as though they had been dusted with flour. They were dull, grey, and in places covered with a strange coating that looked like frost. The dragon lay with his heavy head resting on his front paws. His golden eyes were half closed, and his breath escaped his chest with a heavy, raspy wheeze. "Hello, little one," Luna whispered softly. She felt no fear, only boundless pity. The dragon opened one eye. The pupil, usually vertical and sharp, was dilated and cloudy. He tried to lift his head, opened his maw to, as it seemed, growl or release a warning jet of flame. Rolf instinctively took a step back, reaching for his wand, but Codreanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Watch," he said. No fire burst from the dragon's maw. There was not even a spark or smoke. Instead, with a dull, dry sound akin to a landslide of sand, a cloud of thick grey ash erupted from his throat. It slowly settled onto the floor of the enclosure, covering the dragon's paws with yet another layer of dead snow. The dragon whined piteously, a sound entirely uncharacteristic for a king of the skies, and let his head drop again. "It started a week ago." Codreanu's voice sounded hollow. "First one. Now there are 12. They are losing their internal heat. Their body temperature is dropping. We tried giving them pepper-up potions, a mixture of salamander blood. We even lit magical fires right inside the enclosures so they could warm themselves. Nothing helps. The fire simply vanishes, and in its place, this ash appears." Rolf had already taken a kit of instruments from his bag, several glass vials, silver tweezers, and an enchanted magnifying glass. "May I take a sample?" he asked, looking at the pile of ash near the dragon's snout. "Just be quick," Codreanu nodded, deactivating a section of the protective barrier. Rolf approached the dragon carefully. He moved professionally, slowly, without sudden movements, maintaining eye contact with the creature, although the dragon seemed to no longer pay him any heed. He scooped a little ash into a vial, corked it, and returned to Luna and Codreanu. "It looks like ordinary volcanic ash, but the structure is strange," Rolf muttered, examining the vial against the light. "It is too fine. And it is cold. Even through the glass I can feel the cold." While Rolf conducted a preliminary analysis, muttering composition-determining spells, Luna did something no one expected. She pulled a pair of strange spectacles from her brightly colored bag. These were her old, time-tested Spectra specs, which she had improved slightly over years of travel. Now they had additional lenses of rock crystal and frames of moonsilver. She put them on and looked at the pile of ash near the dragon. The world around her changed. Magical currents, which usually looked like multicolored rivers, were pale and tattered here. But the most terrifying thing was in the ash itself. "Rolf," she called quietly, not taking her eyes off the diseased substance. "Look closer. It is not just dirt. It is moving." "What?" Rolf asked, distracted from his vial. "It must be a draft, Luna. The ventilation here is strong." "No," she said firmly. "Not from the wind. It is reaching out." Luna stepped closer, ignoring Codranu's warning gesture. She removed a glove and extended her hand over the pile of ash, not touching it. The warmth of her palm was barely perceptible in the cold hangar, but it was enough. Tiny particles of gray ash began to rise slowly, like iron filings to a magnet. They reached for her living, warm skin, forming unnatural sharp peaks. And as soon as they drew near, Luna saw the skin on her palm begin to dull, losing its pink hue, becoming as gray as this dust. She quickly pulled her hand back. "It is hungry," she said, turning to the men. "This ash, it is not a consequence of the fire fading. It is the cause. It is a parasite. It eats heat. It eats color. It sucks out the very concept of life." Codreanu frowned skeptically. "A parasite. We checked them for all known ectoparasites. No mites, no fire fleas." "It is not a biological creature, Mr. Codreanu." Luna took off her spectacles, and her gaze became as serious as it had ever been. "It is something older. It is like materialized apathy. You said you tried to warm them with magical fire." "Yes, the best we could create." "And the ash ate it?" she guessed. Codreanu hesitated, then slowly nodded. "The fires simply went out. We thought it was a lack of oxygen or some chemical reaction." "It eats fire," Rolf concluded, looking at his vial with new horror. Now he noticed that the ash inside the glass had clumped together exactly on the side where his fingers were holding the glass. It was trying to get to his body heat through the barrier. "Luna, you are right. It is a predatory substance." At that moment, the hangar doors burst open with a crash. A young trainee ran inside, his face pale as a sheet. "Mr. Codreanu," he shouted, gasping for breath. "Sector North. Elder Gorm." "He?" Codreanu's face turned gray. Gorm was the oldest dragon in the reserve, a gigantic Romanian longhorn who remembered times before the founding of the Ministry of Magic. He was the symbol of this place. "What is wrong with him?" Codreanu barked. "He turned to stone, sir," the boy cried, barely holding back tears. "Completely. He just froze in mid-flight and fell, shattered, into pieces. But there was no flesh or blood inside, only ash. Mountains of ash." The silence that fell after these words was heavier than any thunder. Luna felt a chill run down her spine. This was worse than she thought. It was not just a sickness. It was an extinction. Codreanu closed his eyes and rubbed the bridge of his nose with a trembling hand. When he looked at them again, there was no hope in his eyes, only the grim determination of a bureaucrat cornered. Initiate Protocol 7, he commanded the trainee. Full isolation. No one enters or leaves. We are sedating all infected dragons. What? Rolf exclaimed. You cannot. Protocol 7 feet means stasis. You want to put them into a magical sleep, but if they are losing heat, sleep will kill them. Their heart rates will slow, and the ash will consume them in a matter of hours. We have no choice, Mr. Scamander. Codreanu's voice rose to a shout, echoing off the stone walls. If this contagion gets out of the reserve, do you imagine what will happen if it spreads to cities? If this ash starts eating the heat in Muggle homes? We must contain the threat. By morning, we will place a barrier of eternal sleep over the entire valley. That is a death sentence for the dragons, Luna said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. You are trying to treat the symptoms, Mr. Codreanu. You are fighting the darkness by turning off the lights. It will not work. Do you have a better idea, Mrs. Lovegood? Codreanu asked sharply. Do you have a magic wand that will make the ash disappear? No, then do not stop me from doing my job. Go to the guest house. You will be evacuated tomorrow morning. He turned on his heel and walked briskly towards the exit, throwing short orders to his subordinates. The trainee ran after him, leaving Luna and Rolf alone with the dying Argent. Rolf stood with his fists clenched. He watched the magizoologist go, his jaw set tight. He is wrong, he said. He is panicking. Science says that isolating an entropic parasite only accelerates entropy within a closed system. Yes, Luna agreed, stepping up to him and taking his hand. Her fingers were warm. And that simple sensation seemed the most important thing in the world right now. But science will not help here, Rolf. At least, not the kind taught in schools. She looked up towards where the dim moonlight was breaking through the glass roof of the hangar. Did you notice where the wind was coming from when we arrived? She asked suddenly. From the north, Rolf replied uncertainly. From the direction of the highest mountain, Dracula's Peak. Exactly, and the bats we saw on the way. They were flying south. They were fleeing the mountain. Not the reserve, but the mountain itself. You think the source is there? Rolf looked at her, already understanding where she was leading. Dragons are children of fire, Rolf, and fire comes from the depths of the earth. If the children are sick, it means the mother is poisoned. Luna adjusted her scarf. Codreanu wants to lock the dragons up. But the problem is not with them. The problem is that the mountain, it has forgotten how to be warm. Walking into the mountains at night, in unfamiliar terrain, during a magical anomaly, disobeying a direct order from the head of the reserve, Rolf listed, the corners of his lips lifting almost imperceptibly. Sounds like the perfect expedition, Luna smiled. Did you bring a torch? I brought two, Rolf replied, checking his pockets. And a bar of chocolate. They say chocolate helps when meeting dementors, and this ash reminds me of exactly that. They cast a final look at Argent. The dragon breathed heavily, and every sigh birthed a new cloud of grey dust. Hold on, Luna whispered. We will bring you fire. They left the hangar not towards the guest house, but into the darkness, towards where the ancient forest stood like a black wall leading to the foot of the dead mountain. The night was cold, and somewhere in the thicket, amongst trees covered in sticky grey coating, something stirred, something that was waiting for new guests, something that was very, very hungry for someone else's warmth. But Luna was not afraid of the dark. She knew that the darkest shadows are always cast by the brightest light. They just had to find it. The lights of the reserve's administrative buildings remained behind them, transforming into a blurred orange smear that was swiftly drowning in the thick, damp fog. As soon as Luna and Rolf crossed the invisible line that separated the tended grounds from the wild forest, the world changed. It was akin to diving under water with one's eyes open. Sounds became muffled, distorted. The familiar noise of the wind in the treetops vanished, giving way to a heavy cotton-wool silence. The forest surrounding the foot of Dracula's Peak was ancient. Trees grew here back when Muggle maps of the world had blank spots the size of continents. These were gigantic beeches and spruces, their trunks so wide that 3 adult wizards could not have encircled them. But now, these giants looked sick. Luna walked first, illuminating the path with her wand. The light from Lumos here, in this strange forest, was not silvery as usual but a dim, sickly blue, as if struggling through a layer of ice. "Careful underfoot," she warned quietly, without looking back. "The roots here are angry. They remember many footsteps of those who did not return." Rolf, walking a pace behind, tried not to lag, whilst simultaneously scanning the area with his omniculars, set to night vision and thermal detection mode. "The soil has changed," he whispered, crouching down to touch the ground. "Look, Luna, this is not earth. It is glass." Luna stopped and looked down. Indeed, what looked from afar like fallen leaves and pine needles turned out to be a brittle grey crust upon closer inspection. Each step they took was accompanied, not by a soft rustle, but by an unpleasant, dry crunch, as if they were walking on shattered Christmas ornaments. The grass beneath their feet was not green, nor even yellow with autumn. It was the color of old ash, frozen in unnatural poses, as if time for it had stopped in an instant. "This is entropy made physical," Rolf said, standing up and brushing off his gloves. His voice sounded concerned. "That ash in the hangar. It does not merely parasitize the dragons. It is changing the very structure of matter around it. It draws energy from the bonds between atoms. If we linger here too long, our robes will begin to disintegrate." "Our robes will hold," Luna replied calmly, continuing on her way. "They are soaked in hope, and a little beeswax. And that is not bad protection against sadness. But you are right, the forest is suffering. Do you smell that?" Rolf sniffed the air. Besides the expected scent of rotting leaves and dampness, there hung something sweet, cloying in the air. "Lilies?" he asked in surprise. "But it is not the season, and they do not grow at this altitude. It is the scent of oblivion." Luna stopped by a massive fallen tree, its trunk completely covered in the same grey fuzz as the dragon scales in the hangar. When something dies not of its own accord but from a loss of meaning, it smells of sweet decay. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air above their heads. Rolf reacted instantly, raising his wand and shielding Luna with his body. A flock of creatures emerged from the darkness. They were bats, but not ordinary ones. Their wings, with a span of 1/2 meter, shimmered with a reddish tint in the wandlight. Carpathian vampire bats. Usually, these creatures were aggressive predators that hunted goats and sheep, and occasionally might attack a lone traveler. Rolf had already begun to formulate the impedimenta jinx, but Luna placed a hand on his forearm, lowering his wand. "Do not shoot," she said. Look, they are not attacking. The flock swept past them in a chaotic whirlwind, their wings barely missing the wizards' heads. They were squeaking, high, piercingly, on the edge of ultrasound. But this was not a battle cry. It was a shriek of panic. The bats were flying not towards them. They were flying away from the mountain. They are fleeing, Rolf stated, following the last bat with his eyes as it disappeared into the darkness behind them. They are abandoning their nests. And that means that up ahead there is something more terrible than they are. Or something that makes their existence there impossible, Luna added. Come on, we must go where they came from. They moved on, delving deeper into the thicket. The forest grew stranger with every step. The trees here stood so densely that their crowns completely blocked out the sky, letting through not a single ray of moonlight. The only guide was the slope of the ground. They were constantly climbing upwards. After half an hour of arduous ascent, Rolf suddenly stopped and turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" he asked in a whisper. "Footsteps?" Luna asked, just as quietly. "Yes. Someone is following us." I heard glass crunching. But the rhythm, it is odd. That is not a human. Luna slowly turned around, raising her wand higher. The light picked out silhouettes of trees covered in grey webs from the darkness, bushes that resembled skeletons, and no one. The silence was absolute, but Luna knew that eyes often lie, especially in places saturated with old magic. She took off her spectrospecs, which hung around her neck, and looked through them. "Oh," she said with mild interest. "We have a companion. By that old oak, to the left." "Do you see a small mound that looks like a stone?" Rolf squinted. "I see it. It is just a boulder, Luna." "No, Rolf. That is a pograbin." "A pograbin?" Rolf raised his eyebrows in surprise. "A Russian demon of despair. What is it doing here? They usually live closer to swamps." "Perhaps it sensed a buffet." Luna smiled sadly. "Pograbins feed on human despair. They follow travelers, pretending to be stones when looked at, and creep closer when the victim is distracted. They wait for hopelessness to seize the person before attacking." "Wonderful," Rolf grumbled. "So we are being followed by a pocket dementor. Shall I chase it away?" "No need," Luna objected. "As long as we do not lose hope. It is harmless. Besides, it is not here for us. Look at it more closely. It is trembling." Rolf took a step forward, and the stone by the oak indeed shuddered. A small, grey, hairy creature, with a huge bald head resembling a cobblestone, peeked out from behind the roots for a moment. Its large round eyes were full of terror. The pograbin squeaked piteously, and darted into a hole under the roots. "Even a demon of despair is afraid of what is happening to this forest," Rolf said. "That is a bad sign, Luna. A very bad sign. If a creature that lives off negative emotions is fleeing this place, it means there are no emotions here. There is only emptiness." They continued their journey in silence. Words seemed superfluous and heavy, as if every sentence had to be dragged through thick syrup. The cold became more palpable. It was not just the frost of a mountain night, it was a cold that penetrated beneath the skin, ignoring warming charms. Suddenly, the forest parted. They stepped out onto a small plateau surrounded by cliffs. In the middle of this clearing, bathed in ghostly light that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, lay something enormous. It looked like a hill covered in snow. But when Luna approached closer, she saw that it was not snow. It was ash. A thick layer of grey ash that pulsed softly, as if breathing. And beneath the ash, outlines could be guessed. A gigantic wing, bent at an unnatural angle. A long neck, arched in a final spasm of pain. A spiked tail, half submerged in stone. Merlin's beard. Rolf exhaled, stopping dead in his tracks. It is Gorm. The very elder the trainee spoke of. Before them lay the body of Romania's oldest dragon. But it was no longer a body in the biological sense. The dragon had not died and decomposed. He had turned into a statue. His majestic scales, which once withstood the strikes of the strongest spells, had become brittle, grey stone. His eyes, once burning gold, were now two abysses filled with dust. Rolf approached the dragon with professional caution, but his hands were trembling. He took out his magical field analyzer, a complex device with numerous brass gears and a crystal in the center. "Incredible," he whispered, looking at the readings. "No biosignature. 0, but the magical background is off the scale. This body, it acts as an antenna. It is receiving a signal from the depths of the mountain." Luna was not looking at the instruments. She approached the dragon's snout. It was massive, taller than Luna herself. She removed a glove, and hesitating only for a moment, placed her palm on the cold, rough nose of the petrified giant. "Can you hear me?" she asked, in a whisper. "Luna, do not touch it," Rolf shouted. "We do not know how this infection is transmitted." "It is not an infection, Rolf," she replied, not removing her hand. She closed her eyes, tuning into the sensations. "It is memory. He did not die. He simply forgot how to live. His fire did not go out, it hid. Deep, deep down." Luna felt a vibration, very faint, on the edge of perception. It was not a heartbeat. It was like the echo of a distant bell, ringing underwater. The dragon was part of the mountain, and through him, she heard the mountain itself. "He is crying," she said, opening her eyes. They glistened with tears, not from pain, from loneliness. "He says the source has fallen silent. Mother has fallen asleep and her dreams have become nightmares." "The source?" Rolf asked, coming closer. "Do you mean the magma chamber? Geological activity?" "No, the heart," Luna corrected. "That which makes this mountain alive." "Rolf, look at the ash around him." Rolf shifted his gaze downwards. The ash around the dragon's body did not lie chaotically. It formed perfect concentric circles, resembling patterns in the sand of a Zen garden. And these circles were slowly rotating. "Is it a hive mind?" Rolf suggested. "The ash particles are coordinating their actions. It resembles the behavior of mycelium or a colony of insects." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shook. It was not an ordinary tremor. The sound was as if somewhere deep below, a gigantic bone had cracked. The ash on the dragon's body reacted instantly. It rose into the air, forming a thick cloud that swirled around them. "Back," Rolf commanded, grabbing Luna by the shoulder. "Magical instability levels are critical." But there was no way back. The trees surrounding the clearing began to change. Their branches lengthened, becoming sharp as spears, and lowered, forming a cage. The grey coating on the trunks flared with a ghostly, cold light. From a crack that had formed near the dragon's paw, a column of flame erupted. But it was not fire. It was cold fire, a phenomenon written about only in the darkest of books. It was absolutely white, without a hint of yellow or red. And it provided no warmth. On the contrary, the air around it instantly turned to frost. "Protego Maxima!" Rolf shouted, creating a powerful shield. The cold flame struck the barrier, and the shield crackled. Rolf groaned from the strain. "It is drinking the shield's magic," he shouted over the roar. "Luna, we cannot stay here. We must run." "Where?" she shouted back, trying to keep her footing as the earth heaved. "The forest is closed." "Down!" Rolf pointed to the crack from which the cold fire was spewing. It was widening, turning into a chasm. "The only way is the way of the fire." "You are suggesting we jump into an active vent?" Luna clarified, holding onto his arm to keep from falling. "It is not a vent. It is a ventilation shaft for ancient catacombs. I can see masonry on the walls." Rolf looked mad, his hair standing on end from static electricity, but his eyes burned with determination. "Either we jump there, or we turn into garden sculptures like poor Gorm." Rolf's shield began to cover in cracks resembling a spiderweb. The ash outside was already forming a tight ring, constricting around them. It reached for their warmth, greedy and relentless. Luna looked at Rolf, then at the dragon, then into the dark abyss that had opened beside them. "I have always wanted to see what is down there," she said suddenly, quite calmly. "I hope there are no nargles. They bite terribly in the dark." "Luna, now is not the time for—" Rolf began, but the shield burst with the sound of shattering crystal. The cloud of ash surged towards them. "Arresto momentum!" Rolf shouted, pointing his wand not at the ash but at themselves. He grabbed Luna in a hug and, pushing off from the ground, jumped straight into the fracture. The world turned upside down. The cold white flame licked their souls but did not burn, merely blasted them with an icy breath. They were falling into darkness, and the only thing Luna could see was Rolf's face, illuminated by the tip of his wand, and the grey snow of ash falling after them like a curtain closing the exit to the world of the living. The fall seemed eternal, though it lasted only a few seconds. Rolf's spell slowed them, but the impact with the ground still knocked the air from their lungs. They rolled across a stone floor, tangling in their robes. When the movement finally ceased, silence fell. Absolute, ringing silence of the underground. There was no wind here, no rain. Only the heavy smell of old stone, dust, and something metallic. Rolf was the first to stand, lighting his wand brighter. "Are you hurt?" His voice trembled. "Yes." Luna sat up, rubbing a bruised shoulder. She looked around. "Where are we?" They were in a vast corridor, carved straight into the rock. The walls were smooth, covered in carvings that resembled neither Roman nor Dacian art. They were depictions of dragons. Thousands of dragons intertwining in complex patterns. But the strangest thing was that the eyes of every stone dragon glowed dimly red. "These are not just caves," Rolf whispered, running a hand over the wall. "This is the temple of the first flame. Legends say the first dragonologists built it to make a pact with dragons, not to subdue them. I thought it was a myth." "It is not a myth," Luna said, standing up and pointing into the depths of the corridor. "And we are not alone here." In the darkness ahead, beyond the circle of their wand light, two small lights flared. They were not red, like the stone dragons, nor yellow, like a predator's. They were violet, the color of old, noble wine and deep night. The sound of footsteps was heard, slow, measured, elegant. The click of heels on stone sounded like music. "You brought the noise of the surface with you," a voice rang out. It was velvet, quiet, yet it filled the entire space. And warmth, which has long been forgotten here. Why have you disturbed the peace of my crypt, little wizards? A figure emerged from the shadow. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned doublet embroidered with silver. His skin was pale as marble, and his hair, black as pitch, fell to his shoulders. But most expressive were his eyes, those same violet lights looking at them with a mixture of boredom and dangerous curiosity. Rolf instantly stepped in front of Luna, raising his wand, vampire. He breathed. The man smiled almost imperceptibly, revealing fangs that looked not like a beast's weapon, but like works of jewelry art. I prefer the term keeper, he replied. But yes, your definition is biologically accurate. I am Valerius. And you are standing on the ashes of my home. Luna gently pushed Rolf's arm aside and took a step forward. She looked the vampire straight in the eye, not averting her gaze. We did not come to steal, Valerius, she said. We came to return the fire. Your home is freezing. The vampire laughed. It was a dry, rustling sound, like sand sliding down a slope. My home is not freezing, child. It has been dead for a long time, and you are simply late for the funeral. He made a gesture with his hand, and the torches on the walls flared with the same cold, white fire they had seen above. In this dead light, Luna saw that the corridor led to a gigantic gate, behind which darkness pulsed. But if you wish to see the end of the world so badly, Valerius uttered, stepping aside and inviting them to pass, then be my guest. Just remember, the fire you seek may burn not the body, but the soul. Luna and Rolf exchanged glances. The way back, upwards, was blocked. The way forward led into the unknown, under the guard of an ancient vampire. I have chocolate, Rolf whispered to Luna, trying to add confidence to himself and her. If he tries to hypnotize us, I will throw the bar at him. I think he would prefer conversation, Luna replied. He looks as if he hasn't spoken to anyone living for 300 years. And they moved forward, into the depths of the mountain, where the heart of the dragon world waited for either salvation or final oblivion. The corridor down which Valerius led them seemed like an endless artery, slicing through the very body of the mountain. Time did not exist here. The walls of black basalt were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting not only the silhouettes of Luna and Rolf, but also, it seemed, their fears. Every step echoed with a loud clatter that appeared to grow louder, as if the mountain were counting the heartbeats of its uninvited guests. Valerius walked ahead. His movements were fluid, like a predator with no need to rush. His cloak did not even rustle, but the shadow he cast in the light of the wands looked unnaturally long, as if it lived its own life, clinging to the protrusions of the bas-reliefs. You gaze upon the walls with wonder, Mr. Scamander, the vampire said, not turning around. His voice was soft, but a cold irony could be felt within it. Your mind attempts to classify the architecture. Roman? Gothic? Perhaps early Renaissance? Rolf flinched, caught in the act. He had indeed been examining the high columns that transitioned into vaults shaped like dragon ribs. It is eclectic, Rolf replied cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady. But the craftsmanship of the stone is impressive. There is transfiguration magic here of a strength I have not seen even in the vaults of Gringotts. This is not wand magic, Valerius objected, stopping by massive doors adorned with silver that had darkened with time. This is the magic of memory. This temple was not built, Mr. Scamander. It was remembered. Every stone here is a memory of times when dragons and humans spoke the same language. Before you, wizards decided that the world belongs only to those who hold a piece of wood in their hand. Luna remained silent, but her gaze was fixed not on the walls but on the vampire's back. She saw around him not only an aura of danger, but also a thick, sticky haze of sadness, resembling old spiderwebs. "Is that why you stayed here?" she asked, quietly. "Are you guarding the memory of friendship?" Valerius slowly turned his head. In the wandlight, his violet eyes flared like two embers. "I am guarding peace, child, peace from the likes of you. From those who come to fix what is not broken, but simply tired." He extended a pale hand with long, manicured nails towards the doors. He did not touch the metal, but the doors shuddered and began to open slowly inwards, without a single creak. What was revealed behind them made Rolf catch his breath. They found themselves in a colossal cavern, the size of which was impossible to comprehend. The ceiling was lost in darkness, but from it, like stars, hung thousands of stalactites glowing with a dim, ghostly light. This light was reflected in a subterranean lake that occupied almost the entire space of the hall. But it was not water. The lake was filled with the same grey ash they had seen above. It was a sea of dust that rippled slowly, creating hypnotic patterns. And in the middle of this dead sea, on a small stone island, stood the altar. It was a chalice of obsidian, surrounded by statues of dragons with bowed heads. Inside the chalice, the first flame should have been burning, the source of life for the entire valley, the heart of fire magic. But the chalice was empty. Almost. At the very bottom, a tiny spark barely smoldered. It was not white, nor red, but pale blue, like the last star before dawn, and around this spark, squeezing it in a deadly embrace, circled a vortex of ash. It resembled a snake trying to strangle its prey. "Here is your sickness," said Valerius, making a sweeping gesture as if presenting an exhibit in a museum. "You call it a parasite, entropy, a virus. But that is not true." The vampire began to descend the wide steps towards the shore of the ash lake. Luna and Rolf followed him, feeling the air grow colder with every step. The temperature here was so low that the steam from their breath instantly turned into ice crystals, which fell with a tinkling sound onto the stone. "Then what is it?" asked Rolf, taking out his analyzer, the needle of which was spinning wildly, unable to fixate on stable readings. "If it is not a parasite, why is it killing the fire?" "It is not killing." Valerius stopped at the edge of the abyss of ash. "It is protecting." "Protecting?" Luna asked, tilting her head to the side. "From whom?" "From pain," the vampire replied. His face for a moment lost its mask of indifference, revealing a pain so ancient it had become part of his essence. 100 years ago, during the Great War, a group of wizards descended here. They did not want to negotiate with dragons. They wanted to use the power of the first flame to create a weapon, a fire that could not be extinguished. They performed a ritual, a dirty, bloody ritual right here, on this altar. Rolf went pale. He knew history. He knew what wizards were capable of in the desperation of war. "They defiled the source," he whispered. "They broke its heart." Valerius corrected. "The mountain felt their greed. It felt their cruelty. And it did what any living creature does when inflicted with unbearable pain. It closed itself off, The vampire raised his hand, and the ash in the lake reared up, forming a wall. This ash is not dirt. It is a shield. It is a scab over a wound. The mountain created it herself to extinguish her fire, so that no one could ever use it for evil again. She chose death and cold, rather than being a slave. Valerius turned to them. Now he looked not merely like an aristocrat, but like an ancient king in exile. And now you, two children with wands, want to rip off this scab. You want to rekindle the fire so the world can use it again. I will not allow it. Better let the dragons sleep forever in stone than become weapons. But they are not sleeping, Rolf shouted, taking a step forward. They are dying. Gorm. He crumbled. This is not protection, this is suicide. Death is also a form of freedom, Mr. Scamander. Valerius cut him off coldly. Leave. I gave you a chance to see the truth. Now return to the surface and tell your colleagues that there is nothing here to save. He waved his hand, and the darkness around them thickened. Rolf felt his legs stop obeying him, as if lead weights had been tied to them. It was vampire magic, mental pressure, that forced the victim to submit to the predator's will. Come, Luna. Rolf's voice sounded muffled, as if through cotton wool. His mind screamed no, but his body was already turning towards the exit. He is right. We cannot. No, came a quiet but clear voice. Luna did not move. She stood her ground, ignoring the vampire's command. Valerius's magic, calculated to suppress the will, simply slid off her like water off glass. Her mind was so open and unstructured that the vampiric charms could find nothing to latch onto. Valerius raised an eyebrow in surprise. You resist? He asked, approaching her closer. You have a strong mind for one who wears vegetables in her ears. But you do not understand whom you are speaking to. Look into my eyes. He leaned towards her, and his gaze became an abyss. It was the cold gaze, the most potent weapon of the most ancient vampires. It did not merely hypnotize. It forced the victim to experience all the pain, all the sadness, and all the emptiness that the immortal had accumulated over centuries of existence. Rolf, who had partially broken free from the influence upon seeing Luna in danger, tried to rush to her. Do not look. Luna, close your eyes. But Luna did not close her eyes. She looked straight into the violet darkness of Valerius's pupils. A world of images exploded in her head. She saw centuries of loneliness. She saw Valerius's friends grow old and die, whilst he remained young. She felt the cold of the stone on which he slept. She felt that very moment of betrayal when wizards killed the mountain's trust. She felt the ash-filling lungs, felt the desire to feel warmth vanish, because warmth meant the pain of loss. It was an ocean of despair, capable of crushing the strongest wizard. Rolf would have fallen to his knees, sobbing. Harry Potter might have tried to fight this pain. But Luna did what she did best. She accepted it. She built no walls. She allowed Valerius's sadness to pass through her. She looked at his pain not as an enemy, but as a strange, wounded creature that needed to be understood. You are mistaken, she whispered, still in mental contact with the vampire. Her voice rang in his head, pure and chiming like a silver bell. You think you are protecting the fire by hiding it under ash. But that is not protection, Valerius. That is a prison. Pain is the only truth, the vampire's voice thundered in her consciousness. Love ends in loss. Fire ends in ash. It is the law. No, Luna objected. And suddenly she showed him her memory. It was not a heroic moment of battle. It was a simple scene from her kitchen at home. Her mother, Pandora, experimenting with a spell. An explosion, death, and then Luna, a 9-year-old girl, sitting amidst the debris. She is in pain, she is scared, but she sees a firefly that has flown into the broken window. And she smiles at it. She showed Valerius that the pain of loss does not cancel out the beauty of what once was. That ash is not the end of fire, but merely fertilizer for new life. That rejecting warmth out of fear of pain is the worst kind of death. You are not afraid that the fire will be used, she said aloud, breaking eye contact. You are afraid that if it burns again you will have to feel again. And you have forgotten how. Valerius recoiled as if struck. He clutched his chest, breathing heavily, though he had no need for air. For the first time in centuries, someone had not only withstood his gaze, but looked back and pitied him. The silence in the cave changed. It ceased to be threatening, and became fragile. Rolf, who was finally able to move, ran to Luna, ready to defend her to the last. But the vampire did not attack. He stood with his head bowed, his shoulders trembling slightly. You are strange. Valerius rasped. You see the world inside out. I simply see it whole, Luna replied, adjusting her spectrospecs, which had slid down her nose. And I see that the fire wants to return. It is not angry at people. It is just sad, like you. Valerius was silent for a long minute. Then he slowly raised his eyes to the island in the middle of the ashen lake. The bridge is destroyed, he said quietly. His voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, leaving only weariness. There is no way to the altar. The ash will consume anyone who tries to pass. We will find a way, Rolf said confidently. He understood that the battle was won, although not a single spell had been uttered. If you allow us to try, the vampire looked at them, at the serious frowning Rolf and the light, unearthly Luna. I cannot stop you, he said. You, girl, broke my defenses by not even trying to fight. But the ash, it has no consciousness. It is simply hungry. If you want to pass, you will have to give it what it wants. Warmth, guessed Luna. A sacrifice, Valerius corrected grimly. It will demand a part of you. He stepped aside, revealing the view of the ash lake. Go, but remember, if you fail, you will become part of this mountain. Forever. Like me. Luna nodded to him as to an old acquaintance, and took a step towards the shore. Rolf walked beside her, gripping her hand tightly. Do I have a plan? He whispered. No, Luna answered honestly, but I have something better. She felt a small, hard object through the fabric of her robes in her breast pocket. It was warm, even here, in the realm of absolute cold. It pulsed with a weak but steady heat. Before them stretched a sea of grey dust, which began to churn, sensing their approach. Shapes began to form from the ash. Silhouettes of dragons, people, grotesque monsters. They screamed soundlessly, reaching out their ghostly paws towards them. Ready? Asked Luna. With you, even to Saturn on the back of a mooncalf, Rolf replied, and there was almost no fear in his voice. They took a step forward, stepping off the solid stone onto the shifting, deadly surface of the ash. The surface of the ash lake was unlike water. It did not support body weight like a liquid, nor did it allow one to sink instantly like quicksand. It was akin to walking on thick, cold fog, that had suddenly gained physical density. Every step required an effort of will, not muscle. Luna and Rolf's boots sank into the grey substance up to their ankles, and each time they lifted a foot, the ash clung to their soles in long, viscous threads, as if loath to let go of the only source of warmth in this dead realm. The silence here was different. If on the shore it had been merely the absence of sound, here, in the middle of the lake, silence had weight. It pressed on the ears like a depth of water. Rolf felt his heartbeat echoing in his temples, and this rhythm seemed unnaturally loud, almost vulgar in this temple of eternal rest. "Do not stop," Luna whispered. Her voice sounded as if she were speaking through a long pipe. "If we stop, we will become part of the landscape." Rolf nodded, gripping her hand tighter. He looked at his boots. The grey coating had already begun to creep higher, covering the leather of his shoes with a thin crust of frost. His analyzer, hanging around his neck, had long since fallen silent. The magic of this place was too ancient for modern techno-magic. "It is whispering," Rolf said suddenly. "Do you hear it?" "Yes," Luna replied calmly. "It is telling stories about how good it is to feel nothing." The ash around them began to rise. These were not waves. They were figures. Initially formless pillars of dust, they gradually took shape. Here rose the figure of a woman stretching her hands to the sky in a silent scream. There, the silhouette of a dragon curled into a ball, hiding its head under its wing. These sculptures appeared and crumbled in seconds, but each one radiated such a wave of anguish that Rolf wanted to simply lie down beside them and close his eyes. "Why fight?" a voice echoed in his head. It was not the voice of Voldemort or a Dementor. It was his own tired voice. "The fire will go out anyway. The dragons will die. You will die. Why this pain? It is peaceful here." "There is no loss here." Rolf stumbled. His foot stuck in the ash deeper than usual. He tried to break free, but the grey mass squeezed his shin like concrete. "Luna," he breathed. Luna stopped. She did not pull him by force. She simply turned and looked at him through her spectrospecs. In her gaze there was no fear, only boundless understanding. "That is not true, Rolf," she said firmly. "What you hear is the lie of a frightened child. The mountain is afraid to live because living hurts, but you know another truth." "Which one?" he asked, feeling the ash rising to his knees. The cold penetrated through his robes, paralyzing his muscles. "That pain is the price for a miracle." Luna took a step towards him, ignoring the ash figures reaching out their ghostly hands to her. "Remember, you told me about the birth of a phoenix, how it burns to be born again. It hurts. But then a chick appears." She placed her palm on his cheek. Her hand was warm. This simple human warmth was stronger than all the magic of the cold fire. "We are not going to die, Rolf. We are going to wake the chick." Rolf inhaled. The smell of sweet decay momentarily receded, giving way to the scent of Luna, a mixture of cinnamon, old paper, and rain. His mind cleared. "You are right," he said, and the ash holding his legs suddenly weakened, crumbling into ordinary dust. "I am all right. Let's go." They continued on their way. The altar was drawing nearer. Now they saw it clearly. A massive block of black obsidian, veined with silver. In the center, in a depression, the same tiny blue spark trembled. It looked so lonely and fragile that it seemed one careless breath could extinguish it. But a real storm raged around the altar. The ash here did not simply lie. It swirled in a frenzied vortex, forming a wall through which it was impossible to pass. "This is the final frontier," Rolf shouted over the whistling wind. "A barrier of absolute entropy. Any magic we throw at it will be absorbed." Luna stopped a step away from the vortex. Her hair whipped around, and her robes flapped like a sail in a storm. "We will not throw magic," she said. "We will walk through it." "Luna, that is madness. It will tear us apart into atoms." "No," she shook her head. "It does not want to kill us. It wants to scare us." "This is hysteria, Rolf. The mountain is screaming, 'Do not touch me. We just need to hug it.'" And before Rolf could stop her, Luna stepped into the vortex. Rolf cried out and rushed after her. He expected pain, blows, cutting cold. But when he crossed the boundary of the storm, everything suddenly went quiet. They found themselves in the eye of the storm. Here, by the very altar, it was absolutely silent. The ash swirled around them in a dense wall, obscuring the view of the cavern and Valerius, who remained on the shore. They were alone with the heart of the mountain. Luna approached the obsidian chalice. She took a small object wrapped in a silk handkerchief from her pocket. She slowly unfolded the fabric. On her palm lay a droplet. It looked like a pearl, but transparent, with liquid gold shimmering inside. It was a phoenix tear. It emitted no light, but from it came a sensation of such deep peace and warmth that even the air around became softer. "You said it was a tear of forks," Rolf whispered, looking at the treasure. "From that night?" "Yes," Luna nodded. "That night, Hogwarts lost its protector. Everyone cried. And Fawkes cried. But do you know what is interesting? Phoenixes do not cry from despair. Their tears are healing. They cry to heal the wounds of those who remain." She held her hand over the chalice, where the blue spark convulsed, the last breath of ancient dragon fire. "This mountain thinks its wound is incurable," Luna continued. "It thinks the only way not to feel pain is to freeze its heart. But Fawkes knew better. He knew that even death is just the beginning of another adventure." "Luna." Rolf put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure? This is a relic. This might be the last tear of Fawkes in the world." "Things exist to be used, Rolf." She smiled her signature, slightly distracted smile. "And tears exist to be cried. Keeping them in a vial is like keeping laughter in a box." She turned her palm over. The tear fell. Time slowed down. Rolf watched the golden drop fall slowly, infinitely long, towards the black bottom of the chalice. He saw it touch the cold blue spark. For a moment nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. And then a sound rang out. It was not an explosion. It was an intake of breath. A deep, convulsive inhalation, as if someone who had been underwater for 100 years had finally broken the surface. The blue spark shuddered and changed color. It flared gold. Bright, blinding, alive. The tear did not extinguish the fire. It became fuel. It spread across the bottom of the chalice, and where it touched the obsidian, the stone began to glow from within, flushing with red heat. The wall of ash around them froze. The grey dust, which had just been the embodiment of death, suddenly ignited. Every speck, every particle caught the reflection of the golden fire, and passed it on. "Protego!" Rolf shouted instinctively, but Luna lowered his wand. "Look," she said. "It does not burn." Fire erupted from the chalice in a column of light that struck the ceiling of the cavern. But this was not destructive fire. It was warm, like the summer sun. A wave of golden light rolled from the altar in all directions. passing through Luna and Rolf without harming them. It filled them with strength, joy, and a strange sensation of flight. The lake of ash began to change. The grey color vanished. The dust melted, but did not turn into lava. It turned into soil. Into black, fertile volcanic soil, from which, right before their eyes, in the accelerated rhythm of magic, sprouts began to push through. "Fire lilies!" Rolf exclaimed, clutching his head in delight. "Luna, do you see this? They are sprouting from the ash." The entire gigantic cavern was covered in seconds with a carpet of flowers, the petals of which burned with real, living flame that did not consume, but warmed. On the shore, far away from them, Valerius fell to his knees. He covered his face with his hands, but the light penetrated through his fingers. He did not burn, as vampires fear. This light was not solar ultraviolet. It was the light of life. He wept, with dry, soundless tears, feeling the ice in his chest melting for the first time in centuries. The ground beneath Luna and Rolf's feet vibrated softly. This time it was not the crack of a fracture. It was a purr. The mountain had woken up, and it was content. "We must go," said Luna, watching the column of fire grow brighter. "Now she needs time to dress up." "How do we get out?" asked Rolf, looking back at the distant shore, the path to which now lay across a field of burning flowers. "The bridge is still destroyed." Suddenly, a noise was heard from above. Through the opening in the vault through which they had fallen, something huge descended. It was Valerius, but he was not walking down. He was levitating, standing on a stone slab he had torn from the floor with the power of his mind. His cloak billowed, and his eyes burned not with violet gloom, but with a new, lavender light. He flew up to the island and held out a hand to them. "Time to return, heroes." His voice was no longer dry. It sounded like a bell. "My guests must not be late for dawn." Luna and Rolf stepped onto the slab. Valerius waved his hand, and they shot upwards along the column of golden fire, through the shaft, through the thickness of stone, straight to the surface. When they flew out of the rift in the forest, the sky in the east had already begun to turn grey. Dawn was approaching, but the forest had changed. The grey coating was gone. The trees stood black, damp with dew, but alive. And most importantly, the sound. The silence had vanished. The forest roared. It was the roar of hundreds of dragons. It came from the direction of the reserve. It was not a cry of pain, but a mighty welcoming chorus. "Gorm!" shouted Rolf, jumping off the slab onto the grass, which had become green again. They ran to the spot where the elder lay. The stone shell into which the old dragon had turned was cracking. Golden light seeped from beneath the cracks. With a loud crack, like a cannon shot, a piece of stone fell away from the dragon's snout. Beneath it, new scales were revealed. They were not dull green, like in old textbooks. They were dark, almost black, with golden veins that glowed in the dark. The dragon opened his eyes. They were clear, intelligent, and full of fire. He inhaled the night air deeply, spread his wings, shaking off the remnants of the stone carapace, and a jet of flame burst from his maw. Real hot orange-gold flame that reached the heavens, scattering the remnants of the clouds. Luna laughed and clapped her hands. "Look, Rolf." He molted. It was not death. It was rebirth. The mountain gave them new power. Rolf stood stunned, mouth agape. "Metamorphosis through stasis entropy," he muttered. then waved a hand at science and laughed too. What does it matter? He is alive. Behind them, in the shadow of the trees, stood Valerius. He looked at the dragon with the pride of a father. "Thank you," he said quietly, addressing Luna. She turned around. "Are you free now?" she asked. "Keepers are never free, Luna Lovegood," the vampire smiled, and for the first time there was warmth in that smile. "But now I shall guard not ash, but flame. That is a more pleasant job." He bowed to them, an exquisite, ancient bow, and took a step back, dissolving into the morning mist, becoming part of the shadows that no longer frightened, but protected. An hour later, they sat on the veranda of the guest house. Marius Codreanu was running around the reserve grounds like a scalded cat, barking orders, cancelling the quarantine, and occasionally clutching his heart with joy when another sick dragon woke up and demanded breakfast. Luna and Rolf were wrapped in blankets. Before them stood cups of hot tea, which they had finally managed to boil. The sun was rising over the Carpathians, flooding the mountains with pink and gold light. It reflected off the scales of the dragons taking to the sky for the morning patrol. Rolf held his cup with both hands, warming his fingers. He looked at Luna. She sat with her legs tucked under her, gazing east. A petal of a fire lily, still glowing softly, was tangled in her hair. "You know," he said, breaking the cozy silence, "I thought I knew everything about magical creatures. I studied all the classifications, all the anatomical atlases. But today I realized I knew nothing of their souls." Luna turned her head to him and smiled. "That is good, Rolf. If we knew everything, the world would be a very boring place. There would be no room for nargles. And for miracles," Rolf added. He placed the cup on the table and held out his hand. "Luna." His voice became a little hoarse. That expedition to Peru, the one we spoke of earlier. I said I needed a consultant." "Yes?" Her eyes shone in the sunbeams. "I was mistaken. I do not need a consultant. I need a partner, someone who sees what I do not see, someone who can hug a mountain." Luna placed her hand in his. "Peru is wonderful," she said dreamily. "I heard the frogs there sing in operatic voices when they fall in love. I would very much like to hear that, with you." Rolf smiled, and there was more happiness in that smile than in any scientific discovery. "Then it is decided. We leave as soon as we finish the report on what happened, although I fear the ministry will not believe us. Dragons were depressed, and we cured them with a phoenix tear? Write the truth," Luna shrugged. "That love is the strongest magic, even for mountains. And if they do not believe it, that is their problem. The main thing is that the dragons know." They sat side by side, watching the sun finally rise above the peaks, flooding the world with warmth. Somewhere high in the sky, Old Gorm flew a victory lap and let out a powerful, rumbling roar that echoed across all of Transylvania. It was the Song of Fire returning home, and Luna Lovegood, the girl who believed in the impossible, knew that this was only the beginning of a new, great story.